Confusion of confusions. Joseph de la Vega, 1688. Here's the first rule of speculation. Never give anyone advice on which stocks to buy or sell, because when circumstances change, even the best advice may prove misleading. The second rule is secure every profit without feeling remorse over lost potential earnings, because the eel may slip from your hand much sooner than you think. It is wise to enjoy what can be achieved without relying on good fortune and prosperity to last forever. The third rule, stock market profits are like the treasures of goblins. They may be precious stones, they may be mere coals that later turn into diamonds. They may also be flints, morning dew, and ultimately, tears. The fourth rule, whoever wants to win in this game must have patience and money, because all values are inherently volatile, and rumors are only loosely based on truth. The one who can endure setbacks with dignity, without being discouraged by misfortune, is like a lion that roars in response to thunder, rather than a doe that, stunned by the storm, flees in panic. Whoever does not abandon hope will win and secure enough money for the operations they originally planned. Because of such ups and downs, many people become objects of ridicule. Some speculators follow dreams, others prophecies, yet others illusions, moods, and countless masses chase after mere fantasies. First dialogue.
Philosopher, what kind of activity is this that people, as I hear, talk about so often, yet I neither understand nor have ever attempted to grasp? I have not found any book that addresses this subject or helps me master it better.
Shareholder. I must say, my graybeard, that you are indeed an ignorant man if you know nothing of these mysterious dealings, which are at once the most honest and the most deceptive in Europe, the noblest and the most infamous in the world, the most refined and the most vulgar on the face of the earth. They are the quintessence of pure science and the epitome of fraud, a cornerstone for the intelligent and a gravestone for the reckless, a treasury of usefulness and a source of troubles. In short, the equivalent of Sisyphus, who is never granted rest, just like Ixion bound to his ever-turning wheel.
Philosopher, does my curiosity not deserve at least a brief description of this deception and a concise explanation of its mystery?
Merchant. That is my wish as well, for the constant adherence to instructions, the shipping of goods, and the circulation of bills of exchange are all extremely burdensome tasks. The weight of this work compels me to seek another means of gaining fortune, even at the risk of losses. Anything, as long as I can rid myself of these tiresome activities.
Shareholder. The best and most delightful aspect of this new trade is the ability to acquire wealth without taking risks, without putting one's own capital at stake, without dealing with correspondence, advances, warehouses, postal fees, cashiers, suspended payments, and other unforeseen difficulties. Here you have the chance to amass a fortune, and if misfortune strikes, you can simply change your name. Just as the Hebrews, when gravely ill, take on new names to deceive fate and find relief, so too can a speculator in distress free himself from looming dangers and tormenting anxiety merely by assuming a different name.
Philosopher, and what new name does such a speculator take? Philip, Leonardo, or perhaps Diego?
Shareholder. No, there is no such need. To save himself, he does not have to flee, nor, as the saying goes, put on Villa Diego stockings. It is enough to turn to Frederick, and he can already find refuge from terror and prevent persecution. Thus, I will fulfill your wish to gain knowledge about our business, and you will see that shares are not just for fools, but also for intelligent people. In the year 1602, several Dutch merchants established the company. It attracted the interest of the wealthiest people in the country, and capital amounting to 64 and one-third tons of gold, over 6.4 million florins, was collected. Several ships were built and sent to the East Indies in 1604 in search of adventures worthy of Don Quixote. The company's wealth was divided into several parts, each called an acti share, which granted the right to benefit from surpluses or profits. Each share was worth 500 Flemish pounds, or 3,000 florins. However, many did not subscribe to a full share, but, depending on their wealth, will, or expectations, took only a portion of it. The ships followed their predetermined course without encountering either windmills or enchanted giants. Their voyages, their victorious conquests, and the immensely rich goods brought back to the country were of the same significance as Caesar's famous words, Veni, Vidi, Vici. They yielded profits that spurred further ventures. However, the first distribution of profits did not occur until 1612, as the company's capital had to be increased first. Then, a dividend of 57.5% was paid out. In 1613, the dividend rate was 42.5%, so that shareholders, after recouping their capital, could rejoice in further profits just as they did in new bolts of velvet. Gradually, the company grew to such a size that it surpassed the most magnificent enterprises known to history. Every year, new shipments arrive with fresh goods, the proceeds of which, according to administrative decisions, are either distributed or used for further conquests. Dividends are sometimes paid in cloves, sometimes in promissory notes, sometimes in pus, whichever the directors deem appropriate. From its inception to this day, the day on which we are having this conversation, the company's dividends have reached 1,482.5%, while its capital has increased more than fivefold. It is a treasure reminiscent of a tree because it bears fruit almost every year. And although in some years it only blossoms, in others it is like the Uraba tree, which bears fruit 2 or 3 times a year and can proudly compete with the Sibyl's tree, which, as we know, had golden branches and emerald leaves. Others call the company the tree of knowledge of good and evil, similar to the one that grew in paradise, because it is so well informed about everything concerning its branches of business. However, I see in it the tree of life, as countless multitudes live in its shade.
Philosopher. I believe I have fully grasped usque ad ultimus differentius, the essence of the company, its shares, principles, reputation, splendor, origins, progress, administration, profit distribution, and stability. But what does all of this have to do with the mysterious dealings you mentioned, the tricks you pointed out, the difficulties you emphasized, the risks, the name changes, and the other expressions and turns of phrase that have filled me with such anxiety, admiration, and confusion?
Shareholder, allow me to return to my initial statement, namely that these dealings are of a mysterious nature in that, even though they are the most honest and noble business activities conducted in Europe, they can at the same time be considered among the most deceitful and infamous practices in the world. This may seem like a paradox, but it is easily understood when one realizes that this business has become a form of gambling and that the merchants who engaged in it have turned into speculators. If this transformation were the only change, the damage would be bearable. Unfortunately, some brokers have become professional gamblers who, though well-versed in flowers, still lose their fruit. To better understand this crucial point, it is worth noting that 3 types of players can be distinguished on the stock exchange. The first consists of the princes of commerce, the second of merchants, and the last of speculators. The lords of finance and great capitalists rejoice annually in the dividends that their shares bring, whether acquired by inheritance or purchased with their own money. They are not concerned with price fluctuations, for they are not interested in selling, but in receiving dividend income. For them, the value of shares is an imaginary pleasure derived from the knowledge that, should they ever need to sell, they would obtain a higher price. The second class consists of merchants who buy shares, valued at £500, and transfer ownership rights to them because they anticipate good news from the Indies or the signing of a peace treaty in Europe. They sell them when their predictions come true and the price rises. Alternatively, they buy based on the cash price, but attempt to sell immediately with a later delivery date, that is, at a pre-agreed price for a future date. They act in this manner because they fear political or economic changes or the arrival of unfavorable news. For this reason, they are satisfied with the interest rate that their invested money guarantees them over time. They consider both risk and profit, preferring to earn less but in a relatively secure manner. They do not want to expose themselves to the risk of the counterparty's insolvency in a futures contract, nor do they wish to concern themselves with anything beyond unforeseen events. The third class consists of gamblers and speculators. They want to decide the scale of their profits themselves, and to make that happen, they entrust themselves to the whims of the wheel of fortune. Oh, those double dealers, Ah, what a grand order of life these schemers have created. The labyrinth of Crete was no more intricate than the one built from their schemes. They buy 1 or 20 shares, the latter is commonly called a regiment, and when the 20th day of the month arrives, the day of settlement, they have only 3 options for resolution. The first is to sell the shares, which, depending on the purchase price, will yield either a profit or a loss. The second option is to take out a mortgage for up to 4/5 of their value, something even the wealthiest traders do without harming their creditworthiness. And finally, the buyer at the bank can register the shares in their name and pay for them, an option available only to the very rich, as a regiment now costs over 100,000 ducats. As the settlement date approaches, shares that cannot be taken over by the buyer or mortgaged must be sold. Speculators betting on a decline, also known as bears, are aware of this predicament, and to force the sale of shares at a lower price than the purchase price, they attempt to trigger a sudden drop. Thus, some speculators may face serious difficulties. Some of those who find themselves in trouble, naturally we speak of deeply immoral individuals, seek to escape their predicament through trickery and conclude that the buyer is not obligated to pay for what has been purchased. This purchase will bring me a loss, so I am not obliged to pay.
Philosopher, what monstrous foolishness, unprecedented madness, terrifying insanity. You claim that a speculator is not obligated to pay for their purchases, yet I fail to understand the reasoning behind such an assertion. I doubt whether he could invoke any legal authority such as Bartolus or Baldus to support such a claim.
Shareholder. And this is the main point and essence of the entire business. Even your Thales wouldn't have known about such complications. And from Socrates, we can only learn that we know nothing. Therefore, I inform you that Solon is not the only author of good laws. Frederick Henry of Orange, the bright star of the House of Orange, guided by wise motives, announced a regulation in the provinces, according to which anyone who sells shares with a future delivery date, but without depositing them in a term account, since they are not the owner of what they sell, should be prepared for the risk that the buyer may challenge the agreed-upon price for a later date. Thus, when speculators, resorting to this trick, called the appeal to Frederick, in reference to the famous stadtholder, began seeking protection, the storms quieted, the attacks ceased, and the unrest stopped. Such operations take place in the deep and dangerous waters of the stock exchange, where swimmers find that if the water reaches their necks, they can only save their lives, nothing more. Therefore, without shame, they grab the nearest straw and declare that the art of swimming lies in avoiding dangers. And the funniest part is that often before 6 months have passed, these same people who had their money taken from them once again enter into deals with the very same individuals they had transacted with before. The fact that they lost everything becomes merely a reason to seek credit, to finance new transactions, and a way to squander additional amounts. One might expect that those who have suffered losses, whose wounds are still fresh, would not risk new ones. But although the proverb, once bitten, twice shy, condemns such practices, the strength of emotions is much greater. After all, gullibility and succumbing to temptations cannot be prevented. I don't mean to say that this recklessness, the appeal to Frederick, and further speculations, is widespread. There are many who only resort to this decree allowing for the invalidation of short sales when they are truly forced to, that is, when they face entirely unforeseen losses. Others, always ready to face the whims of an unkind fortune, when they have managed to sell all their valuable items, gradually fulfill their obligations. But I also have a friend, a strange man, who recovered from his losses by walking in circles around his house, and not to wake the dead, like Elias, but to bury the living. After a half-hour monologue, he let out 5 or 6 sighs, more of relief than despair. When asked about the cause of his joy and whether it was the compromise made with his creditors, he replied, "Quite the opposite. I've just decided that I will not honor this debt because my peace of mind and my well-being are far more important to me than credit and honor." I assure you, upon hearing this story and this unexpected punchline, I almost cried with laughter, but the fact remains that there are many who, like Jonah, even when in the midst of mortal danger, peacefully snore. And while Adam was ashamed of his nakedness, there are those for whom it causes no shame whatsoever, which works to the detriment of creditors. as long as they can keep the money.
Philosopher. I do not deny that regardless of my natural inclinations, I would gladly try my luck on the stock exchange, if only 3 obstacles did not hold me back. First, I wonder if I should board such a dangerous ship, for which every gust of wind could mean a storm, and every wave could turn it into a wreck. Second, with my limited resources, I could only win. If I frivolously wanted to jeopardize my reputation, but to feel humiliated, without proper compensation in the form of wealth, such a thought is vain and foolish. And third, being absorbed in this business seems unworthy of a philosopher. And furthermore, because everyone knows the modest nature of my life, there would be no one who would grant me credit and trust my beard, for they would think that I could not pay for the shares bought on my own account with my beard. No one would lend me money accepting my beard as collateral, like in the case of Don Juan de Castro, unless it were a beard made of gold, like the one of Aesculapius in the parable of Dionysius.
Shareholder, I can dispel your doubts even without going into technical details. The first obstacle is easily removed because I can assure you there are enough ropes to secure the ship from turning into a wreck. There are also anchors that are resistant to storms, for example, options or option prices, and you will already limit your risk, and the profit may exceed even the wildest expectations and hopes. Considering the aforementioned precautions, the second objection becomes unfounded. Even if you do not make money on options the first time, you will not endanger your reputation. You only need to defer the payment for the option, and it rarely happens that you lose all your money. Soon, some fortunate events will surely occur, which will maintain the price even for several years. Since these contracts are made due to fees, and because the payer builds a reputation through their generosity and foresight, you can keep postponing the contract dates and opening new ones. In this way, one contract will turn into 10, and the whole transaction will be favorably and easily concluded. If you still do not have luck with all the open option contracts, and people start to suspect that you are too unstable, try to compensate for this flaw with ordinary gambling, by borrowing the option fee amount. This procedure has become quite common, so you will surely find someone who, in difficult times, will grant you credit and support so you can win without exposing yourself to dishonor. As for the third obstacle, that it is unbecoming for a philosopher to engage in speculation, that should not worry you. The stock market is like the Egyptian temples where people prayed to all animals. It is true that there were no flies in the temple of Hercules, but on the stock exchange, countless men are trying, with Herculean strength, to catch the fly called money. And for this reason, many speculators spread poison and spin invisible threads. If I may, I will explain the phenomenon of options in a bit more detail. By paying the option fee, you either transfer and thus insure your shares, or you make a profit. They are used like sails in good weather and like anchors in a storm. For example, the price of shares is currently, let's assume, at least $5.80. I believe it will rise significantly thanks to large shipments coming from India. Also, because the company is thriving, its goods have an excellent reputation. It pays dividends, and there is peace in Europe. Nevertheless, I do not decide to buy the shares because I fear that if my calculations are wrong, I may suffer a loss and lose face. Therefore, I turn to people interested in options and ask them what kind of fee they would charge in exchange for the obligation to deliver shares to me at a specific later date, at a price of 600. We reach an agreement on the option price, and at the bank, we make a transfer to the person accepting the option. Then I can be sure that if I lose, I will lose only the option fee, but I will earn the full amount by which the price of the shares exceeds 600. However, in the case of a price drop, I do not need to fear or worry about my honor. I also do not have to feel anxious thoughts that would disturb my balance. If the share price stays close to 600, I can change my mind, if only because I have realized that the future is not as optimistic as I had expected. Now I can do one of two things. Without risking danger, I can in haste sell the shares, and then any amount by which it falls will mean a profit. I can also enter into another option agreement. In the first case, the recipient of the fee was obliged to deliver the shares at the agreed price, and I, with the rise in price, could lose only that fee. Now, if I expect a price drop, I can do the same thing, just the reverse. I am the one paying the fee for the right to deliver shares at the agreed price. During this time, I can secure myself and often, instead of waiting for luck to favor me, I carry out many successful actions. But the recipient of the fee, even if he risks, buys it for a set date in the future, and with his heart in his mouth, stuffs his pockets with money. The Dutch called these contracts options, a term derived from Latin, from the word optio, meaning choice. The fee payer has a choice. Either they will deliver the shares to the person accepting the option price, or they will respectively demand those shares from them. Since the famous Calipino derives the word optio, meaning choice, from optere, which means to wish, we see the correct etymology here because the one paying the fee wants to have the ability to choose the option that appeals most to them, and in case of a poor assessment, can always back out of the solution they initially wanted to choose. Dialogue 2. Shareholder. In order to prevent you from concluding that the movements on the stock exchange cannot be explained and that there is nothing constant there, notice that there are 3 reasons for price increases and 3 reasons for their decreases: the conditions in the East Indies, European politics, and the opinion about the stock exchange itself. For the latter reason, information as such often has little significance because there are other forces which could work in the opposite direction. If a wise speculator wants to correspond with India to find out, via England, Aleppo, and other places, whether there is peace there, whether the company's business is progressing, how many ships are heading to the homeland, and what they are carrying, and especially whether they have oriental spices in their holds. Although it will not be easy, such information can be obtained. But even if someone possesses this information, wild speculation on faith would be entirely unreasonable. For if the speculator takes a risk greater than their financial condition allows and ignores Seneca's advice that the table should not be larger than the stomach, their collapse under their own weight is inevitable. And since such a speculator is not Atlas, the world will slip off their shoulders. Even if we assume that the information will be positive and true, and private correspondence can only establish this to a small degree, that the reports will arrive on time and that the entire fleet will safely reach its destination, it can all be negated by any other event that happens after receiving the information, but before the business is completed by the company. For ships can sink even in their home ports, and in this way sink the hopes placed in them. Even when everything concerning the East Indies is optimistic, one must still remember the situation in Europe. For example, whether anyone is arming their fleet, whether any disturbing alliances have been made, or whether any other preparations for war are taking place, because such events can cause a drop in share prices. Therefore, it is often the case that some speculators buy based on good news from India, while others sell due to the unclear situation in Europe. In the second case, the chances for substantial profits decrease, while the costs in Europe rise, which increase with taxes. Even if there are miraculous ways to acquire knowledge about the most secret plans of princes, aside from cases like the capture of Babylon, the news of which reached the periphery only 3 days later, the speculators' obligations still change, and their decisions become uncertain. Difficulties and various frightening events related to this kind of activity made me remember a few universal commandments. Here is the first rule of speculation. Never give advice on which stocks to buy or sell, because when circumstances change, even the best advice can turn out to be misleading. The second rule is take care of every profit without feeling guilty about lost potential earnings, because the eel can slip from your hand much earlier than you think. It is wise to enjoy what can be achieved without relying on the belief that good times and luck will last forever. The third rule, profits from the stock exchange are like goblin treasures. They can be precious stones, they can be coals that later turn into diamonds. They can also be flints, morning dew, or finally, tears. The fourth rule, whoever wants to win in this game must have patience and money, because all values are fundamentally variable and rumors only slightly based on truth. The one who can endure blows with dignity, undeterred by bad luck, is like a lion that answers thunder with a roar. not like a doe that, stunned by the thunder, runs to escape. The one who does not abandon hope will win and secure enough money for the operations they originally planned. Due to such vicissitudes, many people expose themselves to ridicule. Some speculators are guided by dreams, others by prophecies, still others by illusions, moods, and countless crowds, by fantasies.
Merchant. Those who deceive themselves this way seem to resemble English Quakers, who believe that their bodies emit an inner light, and that it guides them. Judging by your story, stock exchange players are foolish, unstable, full of madness, pride, and stupidity. They will sell without knowing the reason, only to buy immediately without a reason. What is right, they will find without their own merit, or will make a mistake without their own fault. They will assume that it is a spirit guiding them, but this spirit, it seems, will sometimes take the form of the villain Ahab, and at other times, the angry Saul.
Shareholder. Your hypothesis can in no way be disputed. Once a certain speculator dreamed of the statue of Nebuchadnezzar, so he immediately sold all his shares, explaining it this way. Since the statue was toppled by a single stone, similarly, the company would lose its interest in China, and this fall would undoubtedly occur when ships from India arrived. Another speculator, greatly confused, entered the stock exchange building, not knowing which of his thoughts were wrong and which were right. Suddenly, he was struck by a revelation and cried out, "Vende los Kyrios." This is a stock exchange term whose meaning no one understands. It made no more sense. He might as well have noticed the movement of clouds in the sky in the morning, or passed by a caravan on the road. But then another toreador appeared on the scene, doing his best to remain calm. He was waving his hands, biting his nails, cracking his fingers, squinting, taking 4 steps, muttering something to himself 4 times, pressing his hand to his cheek as if he had a toothache, deep in thought, raising his finger, rubbing his forehead, all the while accompanied by mysterious coughing, as though he could direct the hand of fortune. Suddenly, still making violent gestures, he collided with the crowd, snapped his fingers with one hand, and made shy gestures with the other. Finally, in a frenzy, he threw himself into buying shares. He bought them without limit, took as many as he could, and acquired whatever came to his mind. What was his motivation? Only that he had heard the call. This made a special impression on everyone because people on the stock exchange believed that through such roars, one can just as easily do something foolish as something wise. Yet another joined the group, giving the impression of being an extremely calm person. Suddenly, he became noticeably excited and began throwing shares without any reason, probably only because he counted the buttons on his coat and found their number to be odd. If he won, each button would turn into a rosebud. If he lost, into a pricking thorn. Speculators do not cease to look for ways to protect themselves from such excesses. And as for inventing reasons for rising stock prices during a general downward trend, or reasons for declines during a bull market, they indeed show extraordinary ingenuity. Scholars use the word antiperistasis in this case because opposites have greater power and thus attract more strongly. When the air fights the flame, sparks fly up with greater violence. And since speculators fear the result, opposite to what they desire, they make even greater efforts to achieve triumph. Sometimes the stock exchange is calm, and neither positive nor negative information reaches it. And suddenly a cloud arrives, talking about an impending storm. The sellers of shares rejoice. They begin to talk about the uncertain situation and a possible disaster. The bulls, quick as lightning, hastily move forward, wanting to stop the approaching flood and reject what they consider to be a disgrace to their wisdom. They remind one of Aeneas, who, upon entering Hades, encountered numerous harpies, snakes, and centaurs, yet did not fall into terror nor allowed fear to paralyze his audacity. Instead, he courageously drew his sword. The skirmish continues, and in the end, prices are higher than before the commotion, because the attacks have awakened the stock traders, who, not suspecting an intrigue, had not thought about fighting and continued their regular, peaceful practices. They dedicate themselves to the cause with all their might, proud of maintaining weak positions. Thus, the obstacle turns into an advantage, and the forces that were supposed to throw the stock buyers into the abyss are instead a mere encouragement for them. Despite all these absurdities, chaos, madness, doubts, and uncertain profits, there are still ways to understand what political or business stance various influential people are taking. The one whose business is based on observing these things without blinding passion or irritating stubbornness will win countless times, though not always. But in the end, through his observations, he will discover that no insight will predict the outcome of the game, and even the greatest knowledge won't help. Because when the trends on the stock exchange are unfavorable, even the rich seek to change the trend. And since the illness of the stock exchange is treated the same way as the suffering of a leper in Asia, that is, with poison, so even in this case, bad news does not necessarily have to be fatal. It is worth noting that in this hell of gambling, two classes of speculators collide, constituting such opposites that their decisions, and as I suppose their fates, resemble antipodes. The first group consists of the bulls, also known as liefhebberen, which in Flemish means lovers. These are the members of the exchange who begin their activity with purchases that express their love for the country, the state, and the company. They always desire the rise of stock prices. They hope that good news will invigorate the market and the prices will quickly go up. The second faction consists of the bears, or underminers, from the word contremin, a term from French meaning a countermine used to destroy the enemy's mine. Metaphorically, it means undermining someone's initiative. The bears always start their operations with selling, and some of them even surpass the very Timon of Athens, who loved Alcibiades only because he shared his mission, which was to harm his own country. One must flee from these bears like from the plague, and only side with them in exceptional cases, for example, to catch a bichile, which in Dutch children's language means butterfly. This phrase suggests a chance for a quick profit, which, if not caught fast enough, will immediately fly away. The bulls are like a giraffe, which is not afraid of anything, or like the personal magician of the Elector of Cologne, whose magical mirror made ladies look far more favorable than in reality. Bulls love everything, praise everything, exaggerate everything. They are like Bias, who during the siege of Priene deceived the ambassador Alyattes by showing him hills made of sand and claiming they were wheat. He wanted to show him that such a wealthy city would never surrender due to hunger. Similarly, the bulls make society believe that the tricks they employ will bring wealth, and lush plants will grow even on graves. They are like the Hindus who, when attacked by snakes, treat them as a delicate and tasty meal. They are unimpressed by either fire or the unrest caused by a catastrophe. The bears, on the other hand, are completely the opposite. They are driven only by fear, tremors, and nervousness. To them, rabbits become elephants, tavern brawls become rebellions, and vague shadows are signs of total chaos. But since in Africa, there are sheep meant to serve as donkeys, and castrated rams that can pass for horses, what's so unusual about the fact that in the eyes of the bears, every dwarf grows to the size of a giant? Eutychus tells the story of the two wells in Hestiotida, Sciron and Neleia. If the sheep drank water from the first one, they turned white. From the second, they turned black. And from both at once, they took on different colors, many of which were rare and pleasant to the eye. Therefore, if you want your actions to succeed, do not drink only from the well of the liefhebberen, because it's not good to stand out with too much whiteness. But do not always reach for the well of contremin either, as it's hard to be as black as a raven. In short, neither Neleia nor Sciron, speculation on rising prices should always come from our natural inclinations, while betting on declines should only be occasional. Experience teaches us that usually the bulls win and the bears lose. The company is like the immortal mythological tree that, as soon as it cuts off an old branch unexpectedly and quickly sprouts a new one. Therefore, there is no reason ever to worry about the company's situation, as it will overcome any obstacle through new ventures. Thus, if we want our predictions to prove profitable, it is worth following this signpost and sticking to already trodden paths, whether your intentions are noble or otherwise. If you are driven by dishonest motives, always in the case of an unfavorable turn of events, you can appeal to Frederick Henry. An honest buyer can either deliver the contracted shares or establish a mortgage on them, and the final profit from this transaction will be almost certain. Only war, God forbid, And even that violent could expose this operation to danger and ultimately scare us. One must be mindful of different waves and adjust the sails according to the strength of the wind. In the past, the stock market was ruled by 20 speculators, and since even the smallest event could affect the entire trade, stock prices would drop by 30% just due to predictions of disturbances, and by 50% simply because such forecasts appeared. Today, there are many players, buyers, because those who play for entertainment only, not out of greed, are easily distinguishable, who, due to unjustified fears, have many sad experiences behind them. As a result, everyone views stocks as a precious jewel, and any real loss causes them unspeakable pain. But fear of a common danger of something that may happen in the future means experiencing despair and sadness twice. The high price of stocks raises concerns among those who are not accustomed to it. But reasonable people should not be afraid of it because every day the situation of the East India Company gets better and the state grows wealthier. At the same time, the income from fixed interest investments continues to shrink, proportionally to the difficulty of finding a good way to invest money. The interest rate on regular loans is only 3% per year, and if the lender has collateral, it is only 2.5%. Therefore, even the wealthiest must buy stocks. There are also people who, wanting to avoid losses, do not sell their stocks even when the price drops. But to protect their profits, they do not sell them during rises either, because they do not know a safer way to invest their capital. Moreover, this kind of investment allows for very quick withdrawal of the invested funds. Therefore, thanks to the active business of the stock market, everyone can have control over their money at all times. The value of stocks is further increased by the possibility of quickly liquidating them because the prices of assets belonging to the Amsterdam Chamber are higher than the prices of stocks in other chambers. This is because speculation does not exist in other parts of the province. Dividends, apart from minor expenses, are the same for the external chambers. But for example, stocks from the Zeeland Chamber are listed 150% lower. Stocks from Enkhuizen, 80% lower. Stocks from Hoorn, 75% lower. And stocks from Rotterdam, 70% lower than stocks from Amsterdam. The changes in prices on the Amsterdam Stock Exchange do not have to follow the same direction as the Molen River, which is known for flowing eastward for 2 weeks and then westward for the next 2. They are also not like the Persian well, where the water rises for 30 years only to then steadily decrease for the next 3 decades. The price drop does not necessarily have a set limit, just as the possibilities for growth are not unlimited. When a certain merchant bought a diamond of enormous value in Goa and brought it from India to Europe, the King of France severely scolded him. The monarch asked how he could stake his entire fortune on one stone. The just and polite response was, "Because I was thinking of your majesty the whole time. Therefore, excessively high prices should not cause worry." On the stock exchange, there are always princes and kings armed with stocks who engage in manipulation. Also, be aware that there are just as many speculators as there are other people, and there will always be buyers who will gladly relieve you of your worries. Waiting for an event influences the stock market more than the event itself. When everyone expects a high dividend or waits for valuable shipments, stock prices rise. But as soon as the expectations become reality, prices quickly fall because the joy of anticipating favorable developments and the excitement of expected happiness have already faded. The reasons for such a phenomenon are completely natural. Whenever the situation becomes dangerous, bears fear the strike and do not want to engage themselves. Meanwhile, bulls are optimistic about future events that they consider favorable. Their attitude is so thoughtlessly confident that even less favorable information has no effect on it and does not cause concern. But as soon as ships dock in the port or the final dividend amount is declared, the sellers gain courage. They calculate that for several months, the bulls will not be able to expect too many new positive pieces of information. The leaves tremble at the slightest breeze, and the smallest shadow causes them to shrink in fear. Similarly, there is nothing strange in the fact that stock prices fall, because on one hand they are abandoned, and on the other attacked. Wise people skillfully use what fate gives them. If a sudden change occurs, speculators find it hard to remove their hand from the fire. And when they find themselves in really serious trouble, at best they manage to save only their own skin.
Merchant. As I gather from your statement, the terms used on the stock exchange are not chosen with too much care. I recognize Arabic mixed with Greek, so even the most educated person, if they want to understand this language, has to resort to a special dictionary. I thought there was no more incomprehensible expression than God, but when I found myself on the stock exchange and heard this mix and variety of languages, I felt like I had arrived at the Tower of Babel. Sometimes Latin words were used, sometimes Dutch, like optie or bicile, and sometimes French, like surplus.
Shareholder. Since we're talking about the mixing of languages on the stock exchange, I am not the one to blame for it. This jargon was created for business purposes, and because it proved to be practical, it was adopted. I sell these terms at their purchase price, gaining nothing from it except highlighting and explaining them.
Philosopher, returning to stock market practices. I have a question. You claim that when unexpected news arrives, those who think it is positive buy, and those who think it is negative sell. For a novice or someone troubled by doubts, a wise course of action would then be to talk to both buyers and sellers, consider both perspectives and the reasons behind them, and then choose the most beneficial direction. Only then will all efforts bring the greatest benefits. But this seems to contradict the rules of decency. I would like to ask, do speculators have an obligation to inform me of their secrets? Or can speculation depend on the hope that such communication will happen? But since you yourself claim that an opportunity can vanish in the blink of an eye, is it wise to waste time on conversations? But before you answer this question, allow me to make a few more remarks. For example, it seems inconsistent with philosophy for bears to sell after the reasons for selling have ceased. Philosophy teaches that if there is no cause, there is no effect. Moreover, philosophy also teaches that different effects are assigned to different causes. Meanwhile, on the stock exchange, some buy and others sell based on the same information, meaning the same cause has different effects here. There are, however, other actions on the stock exchange that do not contradict philosophy. One of them is the resistance, so perfectly described by you, that bulls put up against the attacks from the bears. As a result, stock prices rise even in the face of the greatest danger. I would not be surprised either that both sides fight with words, hands, and feet, with all their minds, and risk entire fortunes. Given the situation, I think I should not be surprised that the same information is seen by some speculators as positive, while others see it as the opposite. Facts change under the influence of emotions, and everyone perceives them in a different light. Your advice to conduct small transactions deserves approval. It aligns with my temperament. Moreover, philosophy teaches us that the stomach cannot digest an excessive amount of food. Following this principle, it is wise to be content with limited profits, even if not all possible wealth and benefits are gained. I would consider anyone a fool who exposes themselves to such blows to the face. Finally, I assure you that I personally prefer to believe in rising prices, although I will also talk to the bears. There will always be pessimists, and in the heat of battle, I would like to maintain objectivity.
Shareholder. I decided to translate these dialogues into French so that the knowledge of the stock exchange, which no one has written down until now, would become available to everyone. But when I realized that many parts based on puns cannot be translated, I thought it would be better to add anecdotes and polish the displays of erudition, as well as some profound reflections with an elegant and harmonious presentation. Since jokes about the stock market, as long as they don't provoke anyone's objections, are the main attraction of this business, it wouldn't hurt to use a few allusions. I wouldn't want to offend anyone. I am merely telling stories or, to express it better, shooting in the air. Therefore, my attacks cannot be directed against specific people and thus cannot hit a specific target. I promised an account that is true to the facts, and I cannot fulfill this without accurately reproducing them. And when ruthless critics respond that the truth is destroyed not by those who conceal something, but by those who distort facts, I assure you that I do not intend to hide even the smallest details of what I know. Therefore, as long as I do not consider the topics raised to be indecent, I will remain faithful to this commitment. Third dialogue. Shareholder. Among all the plays performed on the various stages of the magnificent theater that is the world, the greatest comedy takes place on the stock exchange. It is here that speculators, in their unique way, outdo each other with all sorts of tricks, making deals and finding various excuses, among which one can find clever evasions, hiding the facts, quarrels, provocations, mockery, vain conversations, violent desires, conspiracies, cunning frauds, betrayals, scams, and often a tragic end. In one of his songs, Horace praises the sweet ecstasy of the fool who imagines he is sitting in a wonderful theater where actors enter to entertain him, and the intricacies of their performance fill him with delight. Qui se credebat miros audire tragedo, in vacuo laetus cessor plausoque theatro. There is nothing funnier than listening to comedies, which can boldly pass as the product of learned genius. One could thus assume that the entire stock exchange has been portrayed in the play The Palace of Chaos, the bulls in the play Big Pain, Big Gain, The Bears and the Beast, Thunder and Stone, the uninterested in A Game for Fools, the clever gamblers in No Life Without Honor. The lucky ones are represented by May, the Son of God, grant you fortune, the unlucky by the challenge of destiny. You should play in the show Open Your Eyes, and the part that fits me best is give everything without giving anything. Because although I share all my knowledge with you and would like to give you everything, I am still convinced that I will not really manage to give you anything.
Philosopher. In that case, I should be playing in the play, What Happened One Night. Because not later than last night, my peace of mind turned into anxiety, my carefreeness into despair, my admiration into mockery, my knowledge into ignorance, my respect into insults. The speculator deceived me. The cheat demanded that his word be kept. The traitor stole my reputation. Now, there were some friends who were talking about stocks and agreed on a price at the level of 576. The shy ones declared it to be too high. The bold ones, that it was moderate. I was pleased to hear confirmation of my own opinion, and because I remembered the advice to play for increases and wanted to support the faction that loved its country and the company, I decided to express my position by offering the bear advocating the ruin of the state a price of 586 per share. As soon as I made the offer, I learned that the stocks were mine. The noise, shouts, and laughter in which the other players were immersed because of my boldness and their anxiety were so great that I blushed, not because of foolishness, but out of anger and shame. I spent the whole night tossing and turning, thinking that I had allowed them to take money out of my pocket. This morning, at the crack of dawn, I asked about the value of this asset, when a certain rogue informed me, I don't know if seriously or just to torment me, that the price was 5.64 and would soon fall to 5.20. It was a miracle that I didn't drop dead or at least faint.
Merchant. Various rogues maintained that we must have been bitten by a tarantula. We were so excited, and immediately changed the subject of conversation, discussing opsies. They thought I bore a grudge against them because of the agony our friend the philosopher was going through. Driven by righteous anger, I asked how high the fee would be to deliver the shares in October at the price of 580. One of the rogues cunningly stipulated that he wouldn't want to commit to anything binding, but he would estimate it at 20%. I offered him 15%, so he accepted my offer, adding that he would do me a favor and take the risk. And although I was grateful to him for this kindness at the time, today I found out that such a fee is at most 9%. Despite all these inconveniences, I take comfort in the fact that I didn't fall from as high a horse as our friend, philosopher, because I know how much I can lose, and the difference is no more than 6%. He, however, has already lost 10%, not knowing how great the final loss might be or how long his uncertainty may last.
Shareholder. To stop you from boasting too much, I would just like to say that our friend can free himself from torment faster than you can from anger. The undisputed practice on the stock exchange, which was once simple usury, is that the party making a mistake does not have to bear the consequences of the transaction, as long as the transaction made at the price of the day contains an error of 10% of the nominal value. In the case of unexpected information, unscrupulous traders can make offers at a price higher or lower than the day's price and thus try to attract buyers or sellers. However, confirmation of the transaction is necessary as soon as the other party notices the mistake, even if it will be unfavorable for the swindler. Although, in reality, the market reacts very differently to surprises, this rule was introduced by the practice. Therefore, Philosopher cannot only be forced to accept shares at a price above 576, but he can completely withdraw from the transaction. And since this is his first operation and everyone knows he is not a businessman, it will be easy for him to deny the offer and prevent the loss. Of course, the stock market is a place of honesty and haste. For example, it is wonderful to observe stocks and the commotion that accompanies the sale, which always happens after unexpected information arrives. No one changes the decisions made under the influence of momentary euphoria, and once a word is given, it is sacred, even when the price difference is 50%. And although merchants make excellent deals without the help of brokers, who could serve as witnesses, there is no chaos or quarrel. Such honesty, cooperation, and precision are surprising and admirable. But paying for obligations that, according to the rules of the stock market, do not exist, when your credit is not at risk and your reputation is unlikely to suffer, this is not generosity but madness, not timeliness but extravagance, not courage but the foolishness of Don Quixote. What happens on the stock market can be compared to a game. Some of its participants behave like princes. They combine strength with tenderness and courtesy with intelligence. There are also those who lose their reputation and others who do not care about their interests even before they begin the game. A sharp-witted person, observing the activity of the stock market and its studied rudeness, noticed that gambling on the stock market is like death, in the sense that, just like in the face of death, here too all people are equal. I would also like to note that a 20% drop in stock prices is not significant enough to be considered a serious blow. You need not despair or curse your fate because, since the price can drop by 20% in one night, it can just as easily rise by 50. However, it is best never to engage in stock market speculation. It is a great mistake to assume that one can withdraw temporarily from the stock market or that by stopping meetings with other speculators, one can regain peace of mind. If bad luck relentlessly chases you, it will catch you just as easily in the mountains and forests, where lightning can strike and wild beasts can attack. Moreover, it is foolish to think that it is easy to withdraw from this who has once tasted the sweetness of honey. Anyone who has ever entered the enchanted circle of the stock market will remain in constant excitement. It is like being in a prison cell, the key to which lies at the bottom of the ocean, and the bars are never opened.
Merchant. I thus suppress my objections to some of your arguments. I only ask for an explanation of the meaning of the words West and East.
Shareholder. East and West are abbreviations used in the Netherlands, and the company, which we have been talking about so far, is commonly called the East India Company due to its activities in the East Indies. There is also another company called the West India Company, which operates in the West Indies. This second company was established in 1621 with an initial capital of 120 to 130 tons of gold. The stock of this company started to rise at such a remarkable pace that at one point, the shares of the West and East companies reached the same value. It seemed that the shares of the West Indies would become a priceless treasure. Unfortunately, fortune turned. The cloves disappeared, Brazil broke away, the good streak ended, and both the splendor and reputation were damaged. Opinions about the company changed so radically that the shares were sold for 3.18% of their nominal value, and the sellers feared even greater losses. To repair the damage and avoid impending ruin, in 1674, the Bewinth Baron, which in Dutch means directors, and refers to the directors of both companies, proposed a reorganization of the company. It involved increasing the threatened capital through contributions made by the interested parties. This type of assistance was called biedleg, and those who did not agree to the restructuring could be forced to sell their shares. However, a compromise was allowed. After paying a small fee, shares could be transferred to other chambers. The company had three types of obligations. Firstly, there were obligations to the shareholders, whether the shares were inherited from the original subscribers or purchased later. Secondly, there were obligations to the deposit owners, that is, people who invested in the company and agreed to low interest rates. Being wealthy, they simply wanted to enjoy the return on their investment. Thirdly, there were outstanding loans, called sea loans, secured by ships. The purpose of these loans was to expand the scale of trade. During the restructuring, shareholders were required to pay 4% in cash, and in return, they would receive 15% of the nominal value of their old shares in new shares. The deposit owners had to pay an additional 8%, and in return, they would receive 30% of the nominal value of their claims in new shares. As for the sea loans, old loans were separated from the new ones. In the case of old loans, creditors received 8% in cash and 30% in shares. The owners of new loans received 50% in cash and 50% in shares, with no deductions. The restructuring cost the equivalent of 70 tons of gold and was carried out only after careful determination that the aforementioned distinctions were indeed necessary. It was fair that the least privileged group turned out to be the shareholders, as they were the most interested in the fate of the company, whether it would bring profits or losses. The depositors, whose claims were more liquid, were allowed to suffer a smaller loss, since they were interested in a smaller percentage and were excluded from future profits or losses. Creditors were treated even more favorably because the loans they provided were dated later than the deposits. For the same reason, a distinction was made between older and newer claims, as I have outlined above. Thanks to the operations described above, the company was given new life. In the last 14 years, profit distribution has been so insignificant that the total dividend amount is no more than 26%. The share price remains at 110% due to the certainty that ships from Guinea and Curacao will bring goods. And although the agreement has its flaws, which I will mention shortly, people believe in the company's growth. The mentioned agreement, which forms the basis of the company's most important current operations, consists of an obligation by several Dutch merchants to purchase at an established price as many Africans as the company is able to bring from the coast of Guinea to Curacao. Through this provision, the merchants selling slaves to the Spanish West Indies gain no less than the company itself. This is an extremely lucrative business. There is a special agent stationed in Spain who is delegated to oversee it, and the king collects customs duties on it. This solution forms the basis for speculating on these shares, the prices of which will be negatively affected by political turmoil in Europe. These increases the risk for ships and may also signal the inevitable rise of taxes. I should add that although every company is interested in the peace and security of the state, there are certain specific factors that differently affect both types of shares and that cause either an increase or decrease in their prices without referring one to the other. Moreover, certain groups have formed. They are generally called Cabales. I'm not sure if this name comes from Cabal or Cabaloso. Through maneuvers carried out in these circles, the owners of East shares can be relieved of their engagement and thus strengthen their position in the West and vice versa. If the stock exchange turns away from one type of shares in favor of the other, and if a large package of shares is sold for cash to drive up the price of the others, either directly or by providing them to other speculators, through establishing mortgages that provide funds to finance speculative purchases, speculators begin to fear a sudden drop in the price of the first shares and are afraid of further attacks. Consequently, they hasten the sale of the second type of shares. Interest in the paper decreases and the price falls. The West shares are not, like the East shares, traded at a price of £500, that is, face value, but at £1,000. Of course, for some time they were traded at £500, although their value, even in relation to the commercial risk, was much lower than for the East shares. However, some greedy merchants demanded that brokers cut their commission in half. For each party, it was only 1.5 guilders per share, instead of 3 guilders for the East shares. In response, the brokers demanded that each contract be worth at least £1,000. This was to ensure they received the same amount for the same work, that is 6 guilders. Although at first glance the fee seemed hefty, not because of the value of the shares, but due to the easier contract conclusion, it is the loyalty of some brokers to their clients, whom they even refer to as their masters, and the scale of the industry, the enthusiasm and vigilance that makes clients able to expect a decent profit from their money, even with admittedly moderate honesty from brokers. But because the same tricks are used in this business as in the East trade, and because trading these shares is just as honest as it is fraudulent, we will continue to deal with the tricks of the first line, those that are most commonly found in this city and are known all over the world.
Merchant. If it doesn't trouble our friend, I would like to hear about the places and methods of making stock exchange transactions, about how this business is conducted. Because although we know its origin, the innovators, and some of the intricacies of the stock exchange, we still don't know anything about the types of transactions or the place where this competition takes place.
Shareholder. This business is so continuous and uninterrupted that it is hard to name a specific place where it is conducted. The most frequently visited places are Dam Square and the Stock Exchange Building. And at Dam, business is conducted from 10 in the morning until noon, and at the Stock Exchange from 12 to 2 in the afternoon. Dam is the square by which the palace, i.e. City Hall, stands. In Dutch, dam means a flood barrier, because a dam was once built there to protect the city from the Amstel River, from which the city's name derives. Originally, Amsterdam was known as Amstel Dam. In the morning at the square, the game begins and continues until the exchange gates close at noon. Crowds gather in a great rush because no one wants to be fined for being late. Then the battle moves to the stock exchange. Even the greatest exhaustion won't force anyone to lay down their arms, and when there's so much excitement, there's no time to catch your breath. The stock exchange is a freestanding building surrounded by columns. Some people associate these columns with posts, while others think that one can hide behind them like clouds. The name exchange can be explained by the fact that, like a purse that holds merchants inside, each of whom desperately wants to fill it. Since the Greek word purse also means skin, it shouldn't be surprising that many players leave it behind at the exchange. The method of making transactions on the exchange is as absurd as the game itself. In the Levant, an agreement is confirmed by a nod of the head. Here, the sign of consent is a handshake or a slap of hands. But how painful. For many, the strength of the slap on the hands is a promise of victory, but often they end up lamenting the blows dealt to them by fate. And so, one participant extends an open hand and the other grasps it. Thus, a sale of a specified number of shares at an agreed price is made, which is then confirmed by shaking hands. With each new handshake, a new offer is made, and then the bidding begins. The hands become red from the slaps, I believe also from shame, because even the most respected people conduct business in such an indecent manner, that is, by striking each other. After the exchange of handshakes, there are cries, insults, shameless offenses, more insults, shouts, pushing, more handshakes, and so it continues until the trading ends. In the Holy Scriptures, it is written that people have a habit of clapping their hands in surprise, as well as during joyful occasions. Here at the exchange, it's the same. People clap both in surprise and in joy. There are also those who applaud deceit. Others throw up their hands in shock at the scale of losses. People strike their hands together as if watching a comedy and throw their hands up in despair that their hopes have fallen apart. The philosopher pauses for a moment to compare such a vivid description with classical paintings. Then the shareholder continues. To make my presentation deserving of even more applause, I would like to describe the nerves of the speculators and the anxieties associated with the behavior when making deals. I think that's why they are called operators, because they never stop their activity. Thinking about the transactions affects them so deeply that it is said even in their sleep, they trade with themselves and even argue. Once, two of my friends were sleeping in the same bed. Suddenly, one struck the other on the head, giving him a huge bump, and shouted to the friend, awakened by the blow, that he had just sealed a transaction with that strike. The injured friend was like Pythagoras, who was awakened by a rooster. Although the blow that caused the bump put the speculator on his feet, both bump and rooster are said in Portuguese as galo. When two speculators talk to each other, it's always about stocks. When they run around in various matters, it's only because their future stock quotes force them to. When they stand still, it's because their stocks are holding them in place. When they look at something, they see stocks. When they think intensely, the content of their thoughts is stocks. If they eat, stocks are their food. If they meditate or study, they think about stocks. Even in a delirium, they are occupied with stocks. Even on their deathbeds, their last concern is stock quotes. There's one thing that surpasses all this, and it's hard to believe since it seems to be pure fantasy, if not at least an exaggeration. It's the fact that the speculator fights with common sense, with their own will. They oppose their own hope, act against their own interests, often against the decisions they've made. In many cases, each speculator seems to exist in two personas. And amazed observers watch as one person fights with themselves. For example, a piece of news appears that should prompt the speculator to buy, while the prevailing atmosphere on the exchange forces them to sell. Thus, the reasons guiding them clash with the reasons underlying other, different decisions. Reason, which is based on just received information, urges them to buy, while the dominant trend on the exchange encourages them to sell.
Merchant. You told us about the ways, the places, and earlier about the restless nature of the exchange itself, yet I still want to know how transactions are finalized, how stocks are transferred, and how payment is made for them.
Shareholder. I've already told you about the three types of people involved in exchange operations. The first consists of the great capitalists or princes of the exchange, the second of merchants, and the third of professional speculators. Those who live off princely fortunes maintain their princely dignity even in this business. To avoid any issues with transactions, they never visit the exchange themselves but only pass on the orders they consider beneficial to their brokers. The broker then carries out these orders as best as they can. Sometimes when one clear trend dominates, the order can be executed very accurately. But there are also cases where crafty people sense where the broker is heading and then introduce such confusion into the operations that the order is executed with the utmost unexpected difficulty and not as favorably as initially expected. Just like the great financiers, some merchants also do not visit the exchange in person and limit themselves to issuing orders to brokers. They do not consider it appropriate to expose themselves to attacks, insults, and shouting. So to escape all this, they stay away from the crowds visiting the exchange. However, there are other merchants who, like speculators, come here every day. They show that the most important thing for them is not respect, but gaining an advantage, and they place profits above good manners. They have 5 important reasons for this. First, they do not want to pay commissions to brokers, so they conduct their own business, trading with other merchants from their circle. This procedure allows them to save on trouble and unnecessary work. Second, they enjoy handshakes, as they are cordial people who gladly offer and accept the hands of others. Third, if they decide to use a broker's services, it is for personal contact with them. This situation always gives them an advantage of half a percentage point more than the broker would offer to another broker. The broker behaves this way because he considers merchants to be trustworthy clients, not knowing whether he enjoys the same opinion among his colleagues. From the second broker, he will receive only half the commission for the intermediary, but in a transaction with a merchant, he can expect commission from both sides. Fourth, merchants visit the exchange because they want to observe trends, whether prices are rising or falling. And since the entire exchange is crowded around these influential people wanting to conduct transactions initiated by them, merchants can easily learn the intentions of other operators, verify the information they have gathered, and thanks to their contacts, gain an advantage. Fifth, they believe that on-site they will sense the best opportunities because they are virtuosos and veterans of business, and no one better than themselves will be able to make use of the acquired skills. Watch out for things that concern you directly. This is the advice of a sensible person. Successful people in business follow this advice as they believe that no one will care for their profits better than they themselves, and that no one can replace them in acquiring their fortune. I am not surprised that there are speculators who, although free from stinginess, do not give orders to intermediaries, even though these intermediaries would undoubtedly carry them out just as eagerly, fairly, and timely. I only complain that some of them, under the pretext of pleasing the broker, pretend to remain friendly with them, but in reality they do not intend to bring them real benefits. They issue an order to buy one or more stocks, but at the moment of execution, they themselves appear at the exchange and outbid the rate to which they had authorized the unfortunate intermediary to bid, thus deceiving them with flattery. Why issue an order to someone and at the same time do everything to prevent them from carrying it out? Isn't it obvious that with a higher bid, the stocks will go not to? We have already discussed that there are three types of stock transactions, but you should also know that there are three ways to settle them. First of all, we have direct transfers. To carry them out, the seller of the stock goes to the office of the company located in a magnificent building, where their shares are transferred to the account of the buyer or lender. As mentioned before, even the wealthiest use mortgages, which allow them to protect their credit and reputation. After depositing the appropriate amount in the bank officials confirm that the payment has been made correctly. The whole procedure is called converting stocks into cash. This is done with more or less care, depending on the buyer's urgency or how much the seller needs the money. Hence, there are often complaints about excessive haste or visible negligence in the transactions. The second type of stock transactions takes place on settlement days. This means that the shares should, and at least should, be taken up on the 20th day of the month in which the transaction took place, and the payment should be made by the 25th day of the same month. Unfortunately, this procedure is increasingly plagued with negligence, disorganization, and confusion as shares are neither accepted nor paid for within the designated time frame. There are brokers whom we call rescounter or rescuers, whose task is to either balance or resettle obligations, as well as to pay and collect the difference exclusively. Since some of them also seek profit and resort to procrastination and other misunderstandings, in dealings with them, instead of trying to be polite and courteous, one must focus on safeguarding their own benefits and interests. The third type is a forward transaction, which is to be carried out at a later date. In this case, the shares must be delivered and paid for on the 20th and 25th days of the month specified in the contract, unless someone uses the mysterious extension of this deadline. I advise against such a solution, as it harms the reputation and creditworthiness of the party requesting the extension. In the case of futures contracts, brokers use ready-made contract forms that contain customary terms and blank spaces for names, dates, and prices. After completing and signing 2 copies, the parties exchange the contract. Later, after determining the profit or loss, brokers exchange them again. In the case of options, a different type of contract functions, which specifies the place and date of the paid fee and the obligations of the signatories. The forms for mortgages are also different. In this case, stamped paper is used, on which provisions regarding dividends are specified. Other details are also established to avoid any doubts and possible disputes. As for the inactive feature of every speculative transaction, which is to be settled through the payment of the price difference, in this case, my friend, you are correct in saying that settlement does not apply to cash transactions. However, it does apply to futures contracts unless the seller transfers the shares to the buyer's temporary account within 2 weeks. Then the buyer is obliged either to take up the shares or declare insolvency. Although there is an opinion that settlement does not apply to the seller, but only to the buyer, this is an error, and it must be blamed on bad practices. Lawyers claim that reservations provided in Frederick Henry's decree can be made by both the seller and the buyer. It is also assumed that if the seller buys back the shares from someone who bought them earlier, the provision does not apply. This is also an error. For example, the decree does not apply when I buy a share for $5.40, sell it for $5.20, and in the presence of witnesses declare that the sold share will be used to settle those shares previously purchased. In this case, I declare that I owe the difference of 20% of the nominal value, which I lost. Therefore, I cannot refer to settlement because I have already assumed the creation of debt. I must either pay the difference or declare insolvency. However, if I bought a share for 540 from someone, and without a later declaration, I sell them another for 520, in neither of these cases is the seller really the owner of the share. To free myself from the mentioned obligation, I do not need to declare bankruptcy or run away. I just need to refer to the decree. As for whether settlement applies to options contracts, opinions are very divided. I have not encountered any provisions that could serve as a precedent, although there are many legal cases that help draw the proper conclusion. All legal experts maintain that the decree applies to both the seller and the buyer of the contract. In practice, however, judges often made different decisions, always relieving the buyer from responsibility and often ordering the seller to fulfill the contract. If the assumption is true that the regulation applies to both the seller and the buyer, I can rely on it only when, as a trader, I receive a preliminary notice and am forced to deliver the shares on the settlement day, or if, as the recipient of a put option, I am forced to take the shares on the settlement day. On the other hand, if the opinion is correct that the regulation only applies to the seller, then I, as someone seeking protection, will have no benefit from it when I receive payment for a call option, as in this case I'm the seller. However, it will help me when I receive a put option, because then I will be the buyer of the shares. As for the fee for a put option, opinions are also divided because, although scholars assume that the regulation does not authorize legally binding claims, court rulings say quite the opposite. Thus, both the law and case law, as well as the reasons for such decisions, are contradictory. The theory is uncertain, and it is hard to say in which direction the rulings are headed. However, if the payer of a put option is the owner of the shares on the day the contract is negotiated and can offer to deliver them and transfer them to my account within 2 weeks of making the offer, then invoking the regulation would be unlikely for me. Moreover, it would be embarrassing. According to some, it is enough for the payer to have the shares on the day they declare their willingness to deliver them, not necessarily on the day they became a party to the contract. In this way, any objections invoking the regulation would become irrelevant. The same uncertainty arises concerning an established mortgage. Although it is generally assumed that if the price of shares falls below the value underlying the loan, the mortgagee is obligated to pay the difference or declare insolvency. However, some argue with a certain degree of uncertainty due to a lack of facts to support such an opinion that if, within 2 weeks from the start of the mortgage contract, the shares have not been transferred to the temporary account, as the lender maintains, and if the shares remain in the borrower's account until the loan repayment date, then based on the regulation, I can raise doubts both to achieve profit and to protect against potential loss. The funniest and most amusing are the disputes between two brokers who try to snatch pieces of business from each other. In such a situation, all respect for the client disappears, all breaks vanish, the voices become increasingly insolent, insults bolder, and handshakes more absurd. One broker offers £500 and the other accepts the offer, which in stock exchange language is called serpiladas. One broker bids a specific share price, while the other angrily responds, "It's yours," which in stock exchange language means being caught. Whether the shares are caught or stolen, the people filling the exchange argue with each other, and the more inquisitive ones raise such a ruckus that it seems like an abyss has opened, and the Furies have begun a deadly fight. There are two types of brokers. Some are appointed by municipal authorities. These are called sworn brokers because they swear an oath that they will not conduct business on their own account. Their number is limited and only changes in the event of one of them dying or by rare privileges being granted. The second type is free brokers, also called drones, which suggests that they steal honey from other brokers, that is, profits. If a free broker were to be sued, they would have to pay for the reduction of income for sworn brokers. But such actions are only taken in cases of personal revenge. Typically, they are treated with kindness and leniency, unlike sworn brokers, who would dare to actively pursue their own interests. There are countless numbers of such free brokers. In many cases, this profession is, in fact, the only way for impoverished businessmen to escape and the best place of refuge for many broken careers. The trading of shares is such a lively and widespread activity that all free brokers can earn a living without having to become robbers who live to kill or hunters who kill to live. Everyone lives from the exchange and everyone makes progress. They try so hard to replace the lack of an official license with increased activity. They seem so faithful and concerned about their clients that the lack of an appropriate reputation is compensated by zeal and insufficient material wealth to ensure security by sacrifice.
Philosopher. Still, there is one issue related to the stock exchange that you haven't mentioned. I am talking about those scoundrels who drove me to despair on that fateful night and who spoke of ducats. I will not find peace until you explain the meaning of this term to me.
Shareholder. Some have discovered that speculating with regular shares, called large shares or paid shares, is too risky due to their limited availability. Therefore, they began a safer game where they could trade in small shares. Because while with full shares, one could win or lose 30 guilders for each point of price increase or decrease, with small shares, one risks only 1 ducat 3 guilders per point. This new type of speculation, called trading in ducat shares, started in 1683. For the settlement of such transactions, the general cashier was appointed, who enters them into a special ledger, thus replacing the earlier verbal agreements. For each contract recorded in this way, the general cashier receives a fee from each party. Before the transactions are finally recorded, the cashier communicates with both parties. In this business, it rarely happens that an agreement is made for a transaction lasting longer than a month, because the resources of those involved are not too large. On the first day of each month, when the stock exchange clock strikes 1:30 in the afternoon, 2 independent employees of the exchange give the cashier the price of the large shares. Based on that, the cashier determines the value of the small shares. This comedy is called raising the wand, because once the cashier would announce the decision by raising the wand. However, this custom was later abandoned due to the chaos it caused every time. After the price is set, that is, after the fixing, the transaction is settled. Unless, of course, it has already been settled in the middle of the month. Payments are made in cash, and since this occurs more punctually than with large shares, even the most experienced businessmen take part in the trade. As encouraged by punctuality, they turn a blind eye to its questionable reputation, and even by their actions seem to support it. In the past 5 years, mainly within a certain group that is as noisy as it is clever, this branch has developed to such an extent that people from all walks of life in both genders have become involved. Old men, women, and even children. In this way, the steps taken to limit the dangers have only popularized those dangers. Speculation has spread to such wide circles that entire shelves of ducatins are traded, sold in quantities as if they were matches. I fear that one day those who dedicate themselves so eagerly to this occupation will get badly burned and be ruined. When a mirror is shattered, every piece becomes a small mirror, with one difference. The small mirrors reflect a miniature, while the large one reflects the entire figure. Shares are like such a mirror, or at least a certain kind of mirror, which makes the object reflected in it seem to hover in the air, or one that causes those who look into it to stand still in awe, because they can see themselves floating in the air. This mirror is like the mirror of the Achaeans, which, held over a bubbling fountain, predicted life for one and death for another. Cowardly people broke it, that is, the large shares of the East, and cut the crystal into many pieces, simultaneously agreeing that every 500 pounds of large shares would be equivalent to 5,000 small ones. Their intention was to calm the trade, but all they succeeded in doing was multiplying one transaction in one mirror. The reason why almost all speculators are so eager to participate in trading small shares is due to the intentions of the people buying large shares, who want to sell them as small ones. At the beginning of the month, the price of small shares is higher than the price of large ones. And since this operation brings a profit, they do not care about the extra work, the wickedness, or the dangers involved. The foolish transfer of shares from one group of speculators to another, the only transfer shares undergo, amplifies the noise, uproar, and shouting. In short, the chaos reigning on the settlement day. On working days, the settlement takes place in the building of the exchange. On Sundays and holidays, on the main street. The commotion here is so great that some believe they have been attacked. Others fear death. The one who bought large shares but sold ducatins does everything to ensure that the wand is held as low as possible. That is, that the trade lasts a few more minutes. He wants to extract as much profit as possible from the small shares while remaining involved in the large shares. However, the one who bought ducatins because he's short sold large shares demands that the wand be raised as quickly as possible. This happens because he desires to secure his profits, and in hopes of an even greater gain, he will wait for the closure of the transaction on large shares. Thomas de Vega describes the behavior of a fool who asked the doctors to allow him to swim in a lake. When he saw that the water reached his chin, he regained his senses, recovered, and remained in this state. Oh, how many sick people play the stock market, and they all resemble that fool. They throw themselves into the sea of speculation, and when the water reaches their necks, they quickly return to solid ground. But the worst part is that when dazed, they throw themselves into this whirlpool. They are unaware of this cure. It is said that crocodiles are the largest lizards that grow from the smallest. Similarly, ducatons, which have changed from small shares into the driving force behind the most cunning speculators, seem to trouble no one, and no one intends to justify themselves. These speculators vainly believe that ceasing to trade large shares will allow them to escape fate and free themselves from the bonds of stock trading. But they will soon discover that by engaging in the trade of ducatins, they are only prolonging their agony. As I said earlier, these speculators make countless transactions because they want to avoid too serious and painful losses. And although even our eyes speak of our losses, we continue to sink deeper and deeper into this business. May God protect us from losing everything. The pleasures associated with this kind of gambling have reached such proportions that people who cannot bet a full point on a ducatin risk a stewever, and those for whom even a stewever is too much bet an even smaller coin. Even children who know little about the world and at best have a small allowance know that every point by which a large share rises or falls will mean a certain amount of their pocket money spent on small shares. If you were to lead a foreigner through the streets of Amsterdam and ask where he had been, the answer would be among the speculators, because there is not a single corner in this city where stocks are not being discussed. Two main reasons for the introduction of this type of speculation, that is, speculating with ducatins, were the greed of brokers and the needs of the people who invented this game. To explain this further, it is worth noting three reasons for the greed of brokers, which have already ruined many. First, they want to earn commissions. Second, they are looking for quick profits from their own transactions, which arise from price fluctuations. And third, they desire a comfortable life. To resort to the second of the three methods mentioned above, brokers must be well known on the stock exchange, because when closing a transaction, they may be asked about their clients. At that point, they will need the help of a good friend who will sign the contracts for them and hide the true nature of the transaction. Such concealment and masking of orders have spread to such an extent that even merchants resort to this maneuver, although its consequences can be tragic, even for completely innocent people. When merchants learn of something that will certainly cause a price change, they ask brokers to help them take advantage of this change. However, they will only place their order with those who, until the order is finalized, will not reveal the name of the client. They do this because they fear that before the order is closed, doubts may arise about the financial condition of the person placing the order, or the price may change. If a broker receives such an order, he will not dare to close the transaction because he fears that others may notice it and later blame him for closing it too early. He fears the possible reaction of the price in attracting unwanted attention. He suspects that someone's curiosity may reveal the identity of his client, and then no one will want to sell him shares on his own account. In this way, personal interests battle against trust, ambition against fear, profit against conscience, until finally the broker decides to discuss the matter with a friend who, in his name, sells ducatins worth even £1,000, allowing our broker to remain in the shadows. Although this game was invented by brokers, it was also joined by those whose character it never suited. Of course, the majority of the profits gained from such gambling are spent on cards, dice, wine, banquets, gifts, women, carriages, fine clothes, and other luxuries. However, in this business, there are many people who simply want to secure a decent life for themselves and their families. Some play for pleasure, others out of vanity, many out of extravagance, and many simply derive satisfaction from their profession, while only a few earn a living on the stock exchange. If they experience a bad streak and fail to prevent their own downfall, at least they will try to save their honor. These people charge fees, return invested money, pay the differences, until finally bad luck recedes, troubles pass, chaos is sorted, and attacks repelled. It is precisely this, the possibility of avoiding complete disaster, that is the reason why so many decide to dive into this whirlpool. And it is much easier to count those who do not trade in ducatins than those who do. Dialogue 4. Shareholder. In the first dialogue, I dealt with the beginnings and roots of the stock exchange, the wealth of the company, the scale of speculation, and the significance of option fees. At the same time, I made allusions to various fraudulent maneuvers. In the second dialogue, I explained to you the instability of prices and its causes, gave advice on effective speculation, pointed out the reasons for rises and falls, spoke about the fears of bears and the courage of bulls, the results of bold undertakings of the latter, and the significance of the fearful procedures of the former, about the symptoms of unrest and the inability to understand them, the fever and foolishness of speculation, the language used on the stock exchange, and various customary expressions. In the third dialogue, I began to explain various types of transactions, teach you some of the rules of the game, and clarify certain business practices. I talked about the equality of contracts, the timing of execution, the place of transfer of shares, the location of business, dishonest behaviors on the exchange, unrest, vulgarities, handshakes, and the impossibility of breaking free from stock market madness. I spoke about the Dutch West India Company, the rules of speculation with ducatons, types of people encountered on the exchange, delays in account settlements, types of brokers, their conscientiousness, about the risks involved in courage. All that remains for me is to describe the most speculative part of the business, the culmination of stock exchange transactions, the high point of stock market operations, the most cunning and complicated machinations that exist in the stock market maze, and that require the greatest craftiness. For example, 10 or 12 people gather on the exchange and form a circle called, as I already mentioned, a Kabbalah. When the circle agrees that the sale of shares is justified, it begins extremely careful planning of the entire operation and methods of carrying it out. The members of the circle only proceed with the operation when they can predict its outcomes. This way, they can count on certain success, provided no unforeseen events occur. The bear circle strikes the first blow through a futures sell-off, waiting with the cash sale until greater unrest appears. Months in advance, they sell shares worth the equivalent of £50,000, an operation assuming that during this period their prices will fall. As the downward trend deepens, the bear circle begins to receive help from other speculators. It becomes evident that with so many participants, the machination's goal is achieved. The leaders of such maneuvers can confidently be called princes leading a procession, much like Amadeus Viswernov of Savoy, who earned the nickname due to his immensely wealthy entourage. This term can also be applied to the leaders of the bears, due to their countless followers or imitators who resemble courtiers carrying a train behind their masters. Since there are many who simply can't wait to follow the dominant opinions, I am not surprised that a small group at first quickly transforms into an army. Most only think about doing what others do and want to follow their lead. Here's the first trick of the bear circle. To prevent constant postponement of contracts, based on which the great financiers buy shares for cash, and then, using futures contracts, sell them and settle for the price difference equal to interest on invested money, the circle organizes a delayed sale at the same prices at which the shares are sold for cash, hoping for greater profits and disregarding the loss of interest. They are like Aesop's dog, which let go of its catch and chased after its shadow because the shadow was much bigger. Secondly, a broker trusted by the syndicate receives an order to secretly buy a batch of shares from a notorious bull without revealing the original client. Then they sell the same shares but with great publicity, emphasizing that even bulls are getting rid of those papers. And since the broker wants to sell the asset bought from one bull to another, the first bull concludes that the story of a sell-off must be true. Concerned, they begin to sell their portfolio. Thus, everyone, gripped by fear, tries to anticipate the sell-off of shares by other players, treating any advice to buy as fraudulent. This panic is called testimony under duress, when countless crowds of traders immediately react to the slightest suspicion. Thirdly, the bear syndicate sells cash share packages to a wealthy person living off mortgages on shares. Since it is known that this person will immediately get rid of the bought shares, arranging for their later delivery, before determining the price of the day, the syndicate outbids their broker, whom they instructed to carry out the maneuver. They aim to send a disguised message to every company agent represented on the exchange. Soon, this communication will become an open secret, so much so that every major entrepreneur will receive an important message that will worry them enough to make them get rid of their shares. And thus, when the sell-off finally happens, the goal is already achieved. The fear spreads and the price plummets. But the panic can easily be explained. It's as if speculators changed their opinion about their patrons and saw that the foundations they had relied on so far were shaking. Fourth, at the beginning of the campaign, the syndicate borrows all available money on the exchange and does so in such a way that everyone knows it plans to buy shares with it. But then, a major sell-off occurs. In this way, our syndicate kills two birds with one stone. First, the stock exchange must believe in a change of the original plan, which occurred due to some very important information. Second, the bulls are deprived of the money needed to finance their purchases. So because they lack the funds, they must sell or fall into another trap described in the seventh strategy. The fifth strategy of the syndicate involves selling as many call options as possible so that, apparently by absorbing the available loan funds, they exert pressure on the buyers who, if they are to exercise the option, must sell the shares. The sixth strategy involves entering into as many contracts as possible until the recipients of the payments, most likely the bulls, eventually lack the courage to buy on their own initiative. They will have their hands tied because they were previously obliged to take shares covered by put options fees. When players buy with the funds from a call option contract and sell at agreed future terms, or those who sell with funds from a put contract and buy at agreed on future terms, we say that they reverse the direction of speculation. But such reversals are extremely rare, because not only might the chosen direction turn out to be wrong, but it could also make it difficult to recognize the correct trend. The seventh strategy involves acknowledging that the bulls, in order to survive the siege, need shares. Bears give them money and then bears sell the shares covered by a mortgage again. In this way, taking into account the difference between what they obtain from the sale and what they borrow for the purchases, they are able to engage in further put and call operations. It is truly a diabolical trick, because immortality is merely a promise, while death is inevitable. It would seem that by lending money to the bulls, the bears are granting them life, as they can use it to buy shares. But the circle turns and sells the same shares, so the bulls must buy them back, the same assets on which they had established mortgages. Although the bears lack shares without hesitation and with no shame, they create the impression that they have an abundance of them. The shares pass from hand to hand, often 50 times in a week, bouncing up and down like little balls. However, this change of ownership only shows the ruin of the business that shares represent. What difference does it make that the bears buy one share when, protected by their alliance, they sell 10? What difference does it make, since they take over shares covered by a mortgage just to immediately pass them on? How can one suppress the fear associated with this situation and avoid lamentations? Would scholars consider it wrong to claim that I cannot consider the purchase of one share as a purchase in good faith, when at the same time four are being sold? That I cannot consider accepting one share as acting in good faith, when this transaction leads to the simultaneous delivery of 10? The eighth trick of the bear syndicate is as follows. If the success of the action depends on the spread of some information fabricated by speculators, an appropriate document is prepared, which is then, seemingly by accident, delivered to the right place. The accidental finder believes that they have found a treasure, while in reality they hold a Uriah's letter that will lead them to ruin. Acting on their own initiative, they pass the content of the document to their circle and point out reasons justifying the sale. The very same day, a real storm breaks out on the exchange. This way, the information is confirmed, suspicions are dispelled, and doubts are clarified. Ninth, the syndicate encourages a widely respected person with valuable contacts, preferably someone who has never traded stocks, to sell one or two batches of shares, with the group taking on the risk of any potential loss. The goal of such a maneuver is to assume that every new event attracts attention, so that the decision of such a person to sell will cause general astonishment and have far-reaching consequences. The 10th trick of the syndicate is whispering in the ear of another close associate, but loud enough so that those who want to hear can overhear it, that if they want to make money, they should sell. The stones speak, said the prophet, and the walls have ears, as the proverb goes. And our conspirators know these truths from their own experience. If the secret gets out, their advice apparently will meet with approval, and when it becomes clear that they are selling entire packages of shares, the walls and stones will speak. People will look for hidden reasons behind whispered statements. They are grateful for any tips, and since no one believes in the intention to deceive a close friend, the maneuver is successful, the fish bites the bait, the net fills up, and victory is celebrated. In this way, the circle carries out its plans. 11th, to achieve their goal, the underminers, the syndicate, resort to the following trick. They are not satisfied with merely wounding their enemies with words, which Jeremiah compares to poisoned arrows, nor tearing them apart with teeth and arguments. The bears, to suggest that their concerns are well-founded and not just related to the condition of the company, sell government bonds. This is why the bulls begin to believe that the entire country is uneasy, that there are indeed reasons for concern, and that the possibility of war breaking out should be considered. This resort to liquidating long and short-term government bonds may seem insignificant for the stock business, but anyone who thinks so is mistaken. The actions of our speculators, the bulls, are paralyzed, and they, in order to meet their obligations regarding government bonds, meant to protect the market, are bleeding out. All this is caused by false rumors about the dangerous situation for the country, the threats to the company, and the impending market collapse. Finally, the circle resorts to maneuver number 12. Even the bears, in search of the freshest information about market trends, before starting their great operation, begin with purchases, even taking on small offers. If the price rises, they cash in quick profits, but if it falls, they sell at a loss, pleased that they now have confirmation of their forecasts. Moreover, it becomes very helpful that the fearful public pays attention to their actions. It is believed that since even speculators are selling at a loss, the situation must be serious. This is one of the most powerful strategies for influencing uncertain and wavering individuals. If fearful souls see that the bears are buying, they will not know whether they are doing so in order to later resell, which in stock market jargon is called seeking the powder, or whether their opinion or stance has changed, and now they are genuinely interested in making purchases. If the underminer agrees to such pretense, they offer a higher price for the shares than the price of the day. This is called pumping the price. In this way, the bears influence the price because they want to place a short sale at a higher price and thus make a profit. God, with one breath, breathed life into Adam. Similarly, the bears, by pumping the price of shares, give life to many people.
Merchant. Do the unfortunate bulls have no means of protection against such maneuvers?
Shareholder. Of course they do. There are defense mechanisms protecting against the most audacious attacks, and even the greatest tricks can be countered. However, I fear that since the resources invested in implementing one of these goals are the same, and can be traced by observing the behavior of the bears, all two-way maneuvers are equally morally condemnable. Therefore, not wanting to repeat myself, I will remain silent about the steps taken by the bulls. Instead, I will only tell you about the practices of some crafty brokers who, if not for their total lack of scruples, would deserve hearty applause. For example, a broker receives an order to sell 20 shares. If he is on the bull side, he begins to sweat with fear and rage because if he first sells the shares he purchased for his own account and this information gets out, it will lead to accusations of unfair practices. But if he holds on to his shares and first executes the order, this could cause a sharp drop in prices, and he may book a significant loss on his own shares. In the end, he chooses integrity, but only out of fear of being caught, and decides to sacrifice his own interests for the sake of those who trusted him. But people sense that something is being faked. Shouts are heard. The short sellers are getting bolder again. Pirates on the shore, one cries. This one must have taken something for diarrhea, shouts another. A third adds, he's selling as much as he can on behalf of some mysterious clients. A fourth chimes in, he's carrying eggs. Then everyone in unison declares, he's poisoning the market. These are the words our speculators reach for in such cases. But it doesn't affect the silent broker because, while executing the order as best as he can, the only annoyance will be that the order became public knowledge before he finished finalizing it. But this pain doesn't go too deep. It doesn't wound his heart, so the broker feels like a noble benefactor, causing no harm to anyone. The broker in question acts on his own account, expecting a handsome profit. If he receives an order that requires him to execute a transaction against his own interests, his heart races in his chest, his appearance changes, and his tongue swells. His throat tightens, his voice trembles, and he begins to struggle to breathe. Unless he has the skill needed to escape danger, he dies miserably and foolishly. To avoid this, he secretly sells his own shares. He tries to kill the snake that's coiling around his neck without causing harm to the person. He doesn't want to jeopardize his own interests, but also doesn't want to neglect the order he has received. It would be better to avoid these troubles and save his health by trading only on behalf of his clients. What good is it to make some profit, if he even makes any, if, by losing his reputation, he loses his brokerage business and, with it, his entire fortune? It's also worth noting whether the selfless broker approaches the execution of a large order in a wise and cunning manner, because if he tries to buy, all his efforts are directed towards quickly purchasing a few shares, hoping that thanks to favorable negotiations, he can later secure the rest at a reasonable price. If the shares then end up in his hands, it means he has succeeded. If someone tries to snatch them from him, one could consider that he has successfully purchased the shares entrusted to him. At that point, without influencing the price on the stock exchange, he earns a double commission. He strikes with admirable dexterity, showing such agility that one regrets he isn't always able to achieve similar successes. The ingenuity and boldness of the broker sometimes allow him to achieve success even when unfavorable conditions prevail on the stock exchange. Such success deserves even more admiration. And if the broker who receives a sale order is already speculating on his own account in anticipation of falling prices, well, there's nothing that could match the enthusiasm of such a broker. Our speculators often visit certain establishments called Kaffeehäuser or coffee houses, because a certain drink called kaffa, coffee, is served there. In winter, these well-heated rooms provide a comfortable place to rest. They are also full of various amusements. Books and board games can be found there, and one can meet guests with whom various matters can be discussed. One person orders hot chocolate, others coffee, milk, or tea. Almost everyone smokes and talks. This way of spending time isn't very expensive, and at the same time one can listen to the freshest news and even strike a deal. When a bull, optimistic trader enters the coffee house during stock exchange hours, the people there ask him about stock prices. He then adds 1 or 2% to the current price of the day and takes out a notebook in which he writes down orders. The desire to buy shares increases, as does the expectation for further rises, because here, we are all the same. When prices rise, we think they will reach the sky, and when they do, we believe they will escape beyond our reach. Therefore, the clever broker receives more and more buy orders, but in a crafty manner to achieve his own goals, he responds that he already has so many orders that he can't serve everyone. The naive buyer believes the sincerity of this statement. His desire to buy becomes even stronger, so he places an unlimited order with another broker. As soon as the first cunning broker hears of this, he immediately rushes to the stock exchange and offers to buy the shares at a price higher than the day's price. The second broker, previously uninterested, buys them at the higher price, believing that there must be some new, unknown reason for the price increase and the heightened interest in the stock. Sometimes this rise can be maintained and the deception is concealed by success. What seemed like madness at first now resembles a very clever move. One of the most cunning tricks encountered in these circles is for bulls to pretend to be bears. They do this for two reasons. First, because their opponents, the true bears, imagine that if they manage to buy back the shares that have been held and hidden, it will mean that the opposing side, the bulls, has changed its intentions and instead of offering them silver bridges, now wants to sink them. Therefore, the bulls change the price so that the bears have to pay dearly for the shares they had short sold in an attempt to suppress the bulls. In this way, the bulls achieve their goal and, through a game of appearances, defeat their hostile opponents. Thanks to their careful maneuvers, they deceive their rivals who wanted to deceive them. Secondly, speculators use this trick so that, in the event of an unexpected turn of events, they can sell shares without causing panic in the market. Since it is assumed that these particular speculators surely belong to the underminers, the bulls then launch a violent attack. Their goal is to buy the shares offered by the first group, as they assume this group must continue holding its previous opinion and make sacrifices on their behalf. Here's an example. A certain minded man, a broker, is trying to figure out what is behind the crowd gathered on the exchange floor. So, ignoring the unpleasant smell of sweat in the air, he stretches his head over the shoulders of the people creating the crowd and sees that there is an offer for shares at a price of 8, but there is no one interested in this price. The broker turns around and joins the group standing on the other side, pretending he hasn't heard anything before and that he has an unlimited buy order. He starts bidding from 8.5. His followers gain courage and raise it to 9.5. The maneuver succeeds, sparks enthusiasm and applause. It resembles the situation when an electric eel is thrown into dead fish. The eel moves, so the dead fish seem to come to life for a moment. In a similar way, thanks to the broker's voice, his lies, and audacity, the previously dead bulls are revived. Everything he attempts is carried out in an energetic and cunning manner. It seems that this energetic rogue can even bring the dead back to life, just like a herd of cows that freezes in silence at the sight of a wolf, just like a frog that turns pale under a single glance. In the same magnificent way, the bears are silent and pale at such a moment. There are 3 commonly used formulas that can initiate the buying or selling of stocks. So the seller states, "I am selling at such and such a price," or says, "I'm offering them at this price," without further explanation. Or you might say, "I'm offering them at this price to anyone who wants them." There are other formulas, but because they can be too risky, uses them much less frequently. If someone simply says, "I'm offering them," it means that there is no escape from the offered price, whatever that price may be. But if the person later regrets their decision, they will not be freed from it by any friendly gesture. They will have no choice but to pray, complain, and suffer. However, anyone who says, "I'm offering them to anyone who wants them," risks great danger. There are those who count on such a broad offer as if their daily sustenance depended on it, because it is well known that these people have little capital, a poor reputation, and limited trust. They lack the courage to engage in larger deals. But as soon as they hear such a generous offer made by our deceiver, they quickly exclaim, "They're mine." This is the penalty for excessive trust, and such a person must live regretting their hasty decision. The one who only says, "I'm offering them," has one goal in mind. Their intention is not actually to sell, but to trigger a price movement. If someone expresses interest in buying, the appropriate response will be, "I'm offering them, but not to you." And since they are not obligated to anything and only said, "I'm offering," such an action is like a double-edged sword or a double-barreled shotgun. I am not surprised that there are brokers who, if their names are well known enough, only sign with "on behalf of NN." They do this because they are tempted by a transaction for their own account. So they choose this type of signature to suggest that it is merely the client's order. They are thus able to hide their cowardice and stupidity. What surprises me more is that some enterprising brokers have been running two businesses for a long time, one being a real brokerage firm and the other exclusively for executing stock transactions for their own account. When delivering the shares, they are the principals, claiming that the name change was a real one. I heard about a man who, along with his wife, stayed at an inn and wanted to pay for just one person. He cited the words of God, saying that husband and wife are one. When the innkeeper saw the sophistry they were using to trick him, he did everything to repay them in kind. He demanded that the couple pay for 11 people because if you combine two ones, you get 11. The strategy of the clever brokers resembles this innkeeper's trick. Each of them imagines that they can occupy 5 positions and simultaneously play the roles of broker, buyer, contractor, lawyer, and judge. However, there are legitimate reasons why any stock exchange faction falls into panic. This happens when the most influential and most respected broker, under whose protection they had previously been, suddenly departs. As we can assume, such a broker belongs to the chosen few, among the richest and most enterprising people on the exchange. His clients are the bulls, and he zealously protects the interests of the best among them. One day, a clever bear concludes that the stock price is starting to fluctuate. In order to accelerate its fall, he instructs an honest broker to sell 10 shares or without revealing the identity of the person placing the order. The broker carries out the order honestly, intelligently, and discreetly because the only thing that interests him is the commission, even though, of course, he is acting to the detriment of his friends, the bulls. His followers are astonished and ask him if he is selling on behalf of his patrons, and also whether any new information has reached him. The broker does not answer. They want to know how many shares he intends to sell. The broker remains silent. Thus, his former supporters, angered by his betrayal and switching sides, want to cause him trouble and prevent him from completing a profitable transaction. So they manipulate the price, accusing him of ingratitude and of not taking their interests into account. Before the truth is revealed, a truth that has been so carefully concealed until now, the bear who placed the sale order will have already achieved his goal. He has sown the seed of discord, caused a price change, and can now boast of his success. Many brokers tirelessly devise appropriate maneuvers, but for such reasons, they often fail to achieve their intended goals. Bulls spread thousands of rumors about the stock, one of which would be enough to drive the prices up. Bears also implement thousands of strategies designed to sow confusion in the market. However, if some of these fabricated stories turn out to be true, the real consequences may be much smaller than one could have expected. For instance, if it turns out that the situation is not as bad as initially feared, prices will rise despite the fact that the objective conditions have worsened. On the other hand, even the most favorable event, if it does not meet the expectations placed in it, may cause a drop in stock prices. When a cunning broker, interested in price rise, needs to buy stocks worth £2,000, he first buys shares worth £1,000. He does this in order to create the impression that he will acquire them for at least £20,000. As soon as he sees that another broker starts buying too, either following his example or trying to flatter him, he approaches him and, in a subdued voice, but loud enough for those interested in his opinion to hear, speaks about his plight. Swearing by the heavens, he begs the other broker not to ruin him and not to influence the prices, because he still has to take care of enormous volumes. So if something disrupts the transaction, it will end in failure and losses will be inevitable. Now the whole stock exchange begins to take seriously something that is merely a ruse. Everyone immediately starts buying. They want to guarantee themselves the profits suggested by the predicted trend. Although the success of this trick is not entirely certain, it is often worth trying. The evil spirit advised Eve to eat the forbidden fruit and thereby ensure her immortality. If this were possible, the devil would not have given such advice, meaning he did so only for his own benefit. Thus is the case with the whispers of evil spirits on the stock exchange. However, just as described above, they try to convince friends to refrain from buying shares that they themselves are interested in, and if, by asking friends not to influence the price, they themselves all act in a way that changes that price. Such a trick has something of an almost divine plan in it. When a generous broker wants to do a favor for someone close to him, he may try hundreds of times until he finally manages to pass on the necessary information while not being overheard by those who are just waiting for such tips. Out of fear of such situations, all kinds of shortcuts are used. This leads to misunderstandings, as often the other party doesn't know what exactly they were supposed to understand. I, for instance, once asked a gentleman, very preoccupied with his matters, what he thought might happen. He replied in great excitement, "Then, I thought he was calling me, so I followed him and saw him buying large quantities of shares at an inn." Note that he didn't say anything else. I assumed that "then" meant I should follow him, and his purchases were a tip for me to buy as well. Highly satisfied with the advice I received, I rushed to the stock market and bought a small package of shares. Suddenly, I noticed that my advisor, during one transaction, had sold 8 shares. Indignant at this blatant perfidy, I complained that he had invited me to join the operation only to cheat me in such a vile way. But he assured me, confirming it with further sale transactions, that he had used the secretly purchased shares only to disrupt the position of his enemies. He added that he had given me a sufficiently clear tip about the necessity of selling. After all, he repeated, "Then," and he couldn't have said it any more clearly, for someone might have overheard him. The malicious spite, this is the proper definition of the practices of some brokers, who, concealing their true intentions under the guise of all sorts of complaints, act in ways that do not gain them respect. For example, they advise a close friend to sell, although they themselves have an order to buy. What's worse, they trigger a sell-off of shares that they themselves, through someone else, have pushed onto the interested party, as if deceiving the unsuspecting was something difficult and praiseworthy.
Merchant. Could you satisfy our curiosity by providing the reason for the recent such an extraordinary drop in share prices, especially since it occurred in such a short period?
Shareholder. Yes, I will do so with great pleasure. Perhaps you will listen to me more calmly when I mention that the price has already returned from 365 to 465 and has stabilized at that level. But be aware of the many traps that bulls encounter. In the book of Job, Satan tells God that he has wandered the whole earth. I believe that before the misfortune that befell us, this same Satan visited both seas and lands, because bad news came from both land and sea, giving rise to fatal events. On land, there was peace and order. On the stocks exchange, however, there was unlimited access to money and credit. Exports looked very promising. The entrepreneurial spirit was flourishing. A magnificent army under the command of outstanding commanders protected the country. Optimistic information poured in from all sides. Knowledge of business was unparalleled. The population was growing. The fleet was strong. The alliances were favorable. There were no reasons for concern. Nothing caused worry. No cloud was visible on the horizon. And on the earth, not a shadow. A letter from the governor of the Cape of Good Hope, delivered by French ships from the sea, arrived. It contained information that matters in the Indies were going as well as one could have imagined, and that ships full of all kinds of goods had docked at the Cape. These excellent reports could partly be explained by the opening of the Chinese market and partly by the discovery of new deposits. In any case, everyone was expecting abundant crops and a prosperous economic situation. The greatest circles were expecting a miracle, so grand that it was to amaze everyone. There was only one thing that disturbed these very promising prospects. It was the news that one of the heaviest laden ships had turned back from the Cape to Batavia because, due to a dangerous list, it could not continue its journey. But even this was not taken seriously because it was expected that the ship would simply set sail again from Batavia a few months later, together with Na Chapin, that is, accompanied by 2 or 3 smaller vessels. The first shipment was usually filled with a load worth 4 tons of gold, as well as accounting books and other documents related to the activities of the East India Company, which were meant for the board of directors in the Netherlands. A few days before the first ships arrived, another but apparently quite credible rumor appeared, claiming that the fleet had become stranded on a sandbank, but that the danger had already been averted. Then came the news that the ship that had to turn back had sailed again, this time with a different convoy. Such information, favorable for the bulls and important for the future dividend, brought the spirit of Ahab and Satan to the stock exchange. Anyone who did not join the general celebration was considered a fool, and anyone selling shares was viewed as an implacable and mortal enemy acting against their own interests. Every sale was called madness, stupidity, and a crime. The ships safely arrived at port, and the directors read the delivered correspondence. When rumors spread that the cargo, the goods purchased in the Indies, called incoup, was worth only 34 tons of gold, compared to 50 tons the previous year, the mood immediately collapsed and optimism vanished. Not even saboteurs could have delivered a more painful blow, and those stunned by the dazzling prospects didn't even dare to fight back. Had they managed to conduct a short sale of a large number of shares, they would have gained enough of an advantage too when the prices dropped by 20%, buy them back to secure their positions. At that point, they would have recorded substantial profits, and the price collapse during the entire crash would not have been so sudden. But since some wanted to sell only to avoid losing even more than what they had already lost, others to avoid losses altogether, and yet others to make some profit, a general sell-off began, and despondency set in. Those who had to take previously contracted shares sold again to cover their obligations. Those who had shares secured by a mortgage sold them because their value had dropped below the borrowed amount for their acquisition. Those who had bought sold to avoid further losses, and then to compensate for earlier losses. A few of those who had already conducted a short sale, driven by the desire to take advantage of fortune's smile and encouraged by the prospect of profit, deliberately caused further price drops. In the end, the players, like beggars asking for support, started practically begging to sell their shares. Panic reigned, an unexpected shock, so severe that it seemed as if the entire world was swaying, the earth was collapsing into an abyss, and the heavens had fallen. When the contents of the second series of the company's documents were revealed, the atmosphere began to improve. It seemed that, thanks to higher prices, the sale of 34 tons of this year's import would generate as much profit as the 50 tons sold in the previous year. Thus the bears gathered their strength and, not wanting to allow the bulls to catch their breath, started spreading rumors of an impending war. They said they knew of many secret plans that would undoubtedly be carried out. And then taxes and other burdens would rise dramatically, all of Europe would burn, and despair, terror, and ruin would spread everywhere. Even those who already knew the plans of the saboteurs were concerned. As a result, the bears were able to fully control the prices in the market. They dominated the situation to such an extent that cash sales were suspended, solely to avoid the suspension of payments, and they hoped that only a few would manage to remain solvent. Thus, the stock exchange found itself in a deplorable state, as I have just described. Even those few who were considered relatively wealthy sought refuge offered to investors with too many acquired options. That is, they appealed to the decree of Frederick Henry. This confirms the saying that often, when you are like Saul searching for David, you only find his statue. Similarly, on the stock exchange, instead of people, stones were found, and even its greatest pillars broke like dry branches. Regarding speculation on the ducat, the damage was even more severe. By a court ruling, speculation on these imaginary units was deemed gambling, and therefore such transactions were no longer recognized as legitimate. This meant that in the case of ducats, refusal to pay did not even require an appeal to Frederick Henry's decree. During this draining of wallets, when every 500 pounds of shares equal to 3,000 guilders was reduced to 300 guilders and then rose back to 500 guilders, speculators started behaving very differently. Some men of honor paid everything back. Others, at least part of it, to the extent their remaining fortune allowed. But there were also those who, under the sudden suspension of business, which no one talked about anymore, paid nothing but also demanded nothing. One group of brokers didn't pay due to complete insolvency. Others had to refuse payment because their business connections had weakened so much that they lacked resources. There were even some who boasted about withholding payments and showed such insolence, claiming that to deceive creditors, they were even ready to make money out of mud. Had these people been as polite as they were immoral, they would at least have said that a man came from dust, and since they could not satisfy their creditors in any other way, they would give them what they had turned into, namely dust and dirt, and instead of other sacrifices, they would offer their bodies on the altar. As it turned out in the end, the import of the East India Company brought results exceeding the wildest expectations, as the light, like in the case of Gideon's army, turned out to be hidden in the pitcher. Only the size, not the value of the import, was known. Brave speculators, as I told you, did not see the splendor of the transaction, but only its outer covering. After analyzing all the letters from India, it turned out that the sale of the cargo would bring fantastic profits. The pitcher cracked, and the light finally shone in its full glory. But at the same time, the bears sounded their war horns, shouting that war would break out. What a terrible cruelty it was. The gallows traders not only predicted what was to happen, but also what could happen. The bears predicted that, under certain circumstances, the United Provinces would start a war, and this assumption was sufficient for them to declare its outbreak. But I am not as outraged by this as I am by the fact that the mere probability of war was for them the same as its actual outbreak. Here, my friends, is everything I have to say about the recent unfortunate events on the stock exchange, although my presentation only gives you an approximate picture of what happened there. Speculation involved everyone. When it began, the stock exchange resembled a pastoral scene. When it ended, the sight was utterly pitiable. The saying Odessis fortuna juvat, fortune favors the bold, had no application to the East India Company, because we can see, based on its stock transactions, that the bold do not always win, but sometimes fall flat on their faces. However, despite these difficulties, I advise you to speculate on rises, not falls. The sincerity of my words is confirmed by the fact that I recommend something that led to my own losses, and also that I still think well of something that ruined me. I advise you for your own good, precisely because of the misfortune that befell me. And since I see that the stock exchange has already returned to life, I draw your attention to the fact that stocks, which fell by 180% due to expectations of war, have since doubled their nominal value. What saddens me most is the sudden end of decade speculation, through which so many honest people were earning a decent living. That tree had sent out so many roots that no one suspected it could collapse so easily at the first storm, just like how high prices fell so sharply. Truly, it is an extraordinarily sad catastrophe, one that destroys names, dreams, people, fortunes, and reputations in one blow. Julius Caesar wanted to replace the unstable lunar year with a fixed astronomical year of 365 days and 6 hours. He also wanted the equinox to fall on the same day every year, so he sought help from the mathematician Sosigenes. Because it was necessary to change the dates of all the holidays and add 2 leap months, this transitional year was called the Year of Chaos. The ducat speculators understood that their transactions had to be completed by the 1st of September, so above all, they wished for an astronomer to change the seasons and for September's settlements to be extended until November, hoping to see if prices would rebound and if their anxiety would end. But although they did not achieve this goal, what happened was the same as what occurred during the change of the calendar. This year, for many, turned out to be the year of chaos, because many unfortunate speculators, in unison, declared that the current crisis was a labyrinth of labyrinths, the fear of all fears, chaos above chaos. At this point, I suspend our discussion, as the torment has too severely damaged my spirit. I only ask that you, in response to my friendship, accept the sympathy with which I have described to you the progress of the famous company established in 1602, as I mentioned earlier, by the decree of the States General, whose first ships sailed as early as 1594, despite the objections of the Portuguese and Spanish. Today, the company can boast of its conquests of many kingdoms and enjoy the tributes that only kings receive. On geographical maps, dotted lines are drawn around undiscovered regions called terra incognita. Similarly, on the stock exchange, many secret operations take place, which I was unable to uncover, but in relation to them, I applied the same trick as the cartographers. Until our knowledge is confirmed by new research, these areas must remain surrounded by a thin dashed line. I hope that as my friends, you will forgive me for any shortcomings, and as educated individuals, You will fill in the gaps in my knowledge and correct the mistakes I have made.
Merchant. For my part, I would like to thank you for these suggestions. I respect business, but I hate gambling. I know my skills are not enough for such complicated transactions. If I almost lost my mind trying to learn something about speculation, you can deduce from this how important the stock exchange and its behavior are to me. It is possible that I will become a shareholder and trade shares in an honest manner, but I am sure that I will never become a speculator.
Philosopher. I will take the same course because I am too old to face dangers and struggle with storms. I will hold on to the shares I have and pray to God that after the last price drop, He will allow me to sell them in peace so I can keep what I have and not accumulate wealth. All schools of philosophy teach that the soul is nobler than the body, life, more valuable than death, and being, more valuable than non-being. However, in the case of the stock exchange, I am inclined to adopt the paradoxical opinion of the Platonic musician that non-being is better than being. I think it is much better not to be a speculator. By saying this, I mean true speculation, not honest trading of stocks, because just as the latter is noble, the former is morally questionable.